And today we're joined by Ken Rodgers, director of Al Davis versus the NFL. And Ken, I was telling you a second ago, this is a conversation we've been very, very excited to have for the past couple of weeks. So first of all, thank you for joining us. And secondly, take me back. How did this project come to be?
Well, thank you for having me. And secondly, I guess the easiest answer is Al Davis has been on our list of the best personalities in the National Football League probably since 1962 when the NFL Films building was first created. I mean, forever he has been our favorite character in NFL Films history. He just jumps off the screen, and we knew that one day we were going to do this treatment of him and Pete Rozelle and their relationship. And it was really when we featured the Raiders on Hard Knocks where I sensed that the relationship between NFL Films and the Raiders had started to turn a corner because Mr. Davis and Steve Sable, my old boss, they had a tense relationship at some point because Al would call and say, "Why aren't the Raiders rated number one on the all-time franchise list? Why were the Giants featured as much in that piece and not the Raiders? Why wasn't this receiver ranked higher in this piece?" He was always fighting for the Raiders brand and always believed in the right Raiders brand and would always call and want us to feature them more. But when we featured the Raiders on Hard Knocks, I sensed that the Raiders and the league had turned a corner and it felt different. And I realized that 2020 really marked the end of hostilities of that decades long war between the Rozelle regime and the Al Davis regime that fought really over stadium and relocation issues for decades. And Mark Davis and Commissioner Goodell had put those issues to rest. And now in 2020, we were able to make this film not just about the war that was, but we were able to show how the war was now over, moving to Las Vegas, creating this new and magnificent stadium, to me showed that the war for now is definitely over.
2020, a year of forgiveness, right? I mean, 2020 was a year of a lot of things, but hey, if we can get a little forgiveness, if we can build some bridges, if we can get on good terms with a lot of people, I'll call that a W. But Ken, when you look at Al Davis as a character, so from your point of view, not as a football fan, but just as a director, a producer, a storyteller, what about him as a character makes him just so unique and so dynamic and just a guy that even all these years later, people still talk about?
Conviction.
Hmm.
Conviction in who he was. There's not a lot of us in the world who feel confident enough in who they are to be unapologetic about it and not worry what other people think about them. All of us, whenever we're talking to other people, we want other people to like us. We want other people to respond to us positively. So we watch what we say. We try to charm them. We try to make sure that our argument wins. We collaborate. We scheme. Mr. Davis was that sort of figure that he was who he was. He was going to present his point of view. He was a competitor. He wasn't a collaborator as much as he was a competitor. He wanted to win. And he believed in the Raiders. He believed in the brand. He believed in the team and the players and the coaches. And he wasn't afraid to say that. He wasn't afraid to say, no, I care more about the Raiders than the National Football League in this instance. I'm not going to play along. I'm not going to play nice. I want the Raiders to win. And I care most about the Raiders. And that's what's important to me. And that took some guts in a business world where the rest of the owners were on one side and he was the only owner taking the other side against all of them. And that conviction to be who you are and not be afraid of it is something you don't see in a lot of people.
And really, that conviction, that kind of self awareness, that identity, even today, is one of the founding core principles of being a Raider, right? Of being a fan
Right.
of this team, of loving the silver and black. And you know, Ken, so for most of us, so for those of us who obviously work for the team, follow the team, are a fan of this team, and obviously for guys like you who are in the position that you are, you know kind of the story, the more or less kind of general ups and downs of the story of Al Davis and Pete Rozelle. But when you really got into the nitty gritty, when you were kind of doing your documentarian research, did anything about this story surprise you? Was there anything that kind of caught you off guard and you're like, oh, I didn't know that?
There's tons of details that I had no idea about. As a guy who is in his late 40s now, I must have during these trials, I must have been watching the A Team or Knight Rider or something, because I wasn't paying attention to the details that I found in this film. Just imagine today if what happened in those trials happened today. If you had a current owner of the NFL testifying against the rest of the owners, and then a second owner testified against that owner and had a heart attack while he was on the stand. Meanwhile, a third owner accused the first owner of threatening him physically. And meanwhile, the first owner is saying that he has no respect for the commissioner of the league that he is battling. All of this on the courthouse steps on a daily basis. Then the accusation of a plant by the NFL is thrown in there, and the jury
Twitter
is.
wouldn't be able to handle it, Ken. Like Twitter would literally shut down. This is like
I think
the
that all the
situation you're
time.
describing is built for social media, right?
I think that all the time that Al Davis and this trial would have destroyed social media, because for not for days on end, but for years on end, it would have been the story of Twitter every day for years on end. It was that crazy.
But you know, it's crazy to think about too, is when you think of all this madness, all of these legal maneuverings, and like you said, who's threatening who today, the team itself was playing an unprecedented brand of football, which isn't, well, like, it's a crazy story to begin with. And then you think, oh, but the team that was kind of at the middle of it, all they were doing is winning too.
Well, that's what people also need to be reminded of. I don't think so much Raiders fans, but people out there in the country that don't know the history of how advanced thinking Al Davis was in terms of football, while he was also suing the NFL and winning, and very forward thinking in terms of the stadium importance in the NFL, which is part of this story. The things you see in the modern NFL, the attacking defense, the hard hitting safeties, the vertical passing game, everything that you cheer for today, that didn't exist in the 1960s. That was Lombardi Packers plotting, very conservative offense and defense, play the basic football type of style. Al Davis opened up football and really, brought that AFL more aggressive style to the National Football League after the merger, and changed the whole game and brought what we see on the field today to the world just as television was coming out. So part of the success of the NFL was getting on television, and Pete Rozelle deserves a lot of credit for that. But what fans saw when they tuned into television, Al Davis deserves a lot of credit for that, because it was a much more entertaining product because of his football acumen.
Yeah, I mean, he was such a pioneer in so many ways, right? We talk about his his pioneer mentality off the field, but then, as you said, the stuff that he did on the field to change the game and make it more of kind of applicable to what we're seeing today in 2021. But Ken, it's if the past year has taught us anything, it's to expect the unexpected. You never know what tomorrow is going to bring. You look at you and I were having this conversation via Zoom, which has now become essentially the de facto way of communicating these days. But do you think we'll ever kind of see a battle between characters the way that we did with Al Davis back in those days, or is that just kind of a moment in time that we are probably never going to see again?
I don't think we'll see it again. I think these were two sportsmen, and Now it is more corporate in a way
Mm.
that um, you wouldn't be fighting over ideas. You'd be fighting over too much money. And when money gets involved, I think things change. And I also think that the public perception would be much different, and would be harder to go through the years on. I think this is one of the major lessons of the film is that a lot of people still believe that Al Davis, because he was a rebel and a contrarian, um, and maybe even a bit of an outlaw towards authority, that he was a villain or a bad guy. And that's not the case. And these days, people have a hard time drawing the line between the two. Um, if you fight authority, if you're anti-authority, you don't have to necessarily be a villain. You don't have to cross the line and be a bad guy. You see in this film how Al Davis is an incredible person and cares so much, even about his opponent, Pete Rozelle. By the end of the film, the feelings between them are amazingly shown on screen. And I think today it might unfortunately just become inflamed too much. And I think we need to look at this sort of film and see two people who opposed each other more than anyone could oppose anybody, but yet still had great respect and even love for each other, despite their differences. And maybe I'm a cynic, but I find it hard to believe that that could happen today without it going too far.
You know, and something you said earlier, just a second ago, kind of piqued my interest. Can you imagine, though, going through all this stuff, how just exhausting it must be, how just physically, emotionally draining all this has to be, all while trying to win football games on Sunday? Like, it's just the level of energy and commitment is just something that, frankly, I don't know if I'll ever be able to kind of understand from his point of view.
I think for both men, it was obviously for Commissioner Roselle. I think there's a very clear argument that he might have lived longer if not for the troubles in the NFL in the 1980s. It wasn't just the lawsuits with the Raiders, it was also the USFL trying to fight against the NFL. It was the player strikes and 2 seasons of scab play. It was, just tons of stuff was going wrong in the NFL in the 80s. It was a tough decade that he was leading the NFL through. And for Al Davis, I don't think it's a coincidence that just as he moved to Los Angeles and had to keep focusing on these stadium issues, they won the Super Bowl in the second year in Los Angeles in 1983. And then, they've had plenty of good years. There's been plenty of ups since then, but he had to spend a lot of time in the next decade or two fighting lawsuits and fighting things off the field that I know he would have rather spent that energy on the field, concentrating on football. It was exhausting to him. And you see what could have been when he concentrated just on football, what he built in the 70s. So I think both of them, if they were still around, would say that Mark Davis has made the right decision in cooking with sugar rather than salt and letting the bitterness go and not fighting the fight quite so hard and with so much vitriol, and maybe just finding a way to put that aside and fight the fight on the side rather than having it consume you, and concentrate on football, because that's what Al loved and that's what we love. And when you concentrate on the game, the NFL is a great place to work and live and be a fan of. When you concentrate on the business, it just gets frustrating. And I think Al Davis found that out.
Yeah, I think there's a good lesson in there for all of us. And just wrapping it up with Ken Rodgers and Ken, you know, the debut of this of the 30 for 30 is something that I know that really the entirety of the Raider Nation is very excited about. And when you drop the teaser, the social media, at least from where we're sitting, people are excited, they're fired up. What has been the response from the fans in terms of back to you guys, where it seems like people are very, very excited for February 4th for this thing to be shown to the public?
I'm always, I don't know why, but I'm always amazed at the overwhelming response from Raider Nation to anything we do about the Raiders. I shouldn't be by now, but it's so overwhelming. I think there's this perception out there that there's maybe Pittsburgh and Green Bay and Dallas, and they're the big markets, and that's it. But when we do a Raiders film or when we do Raiders content, you can tell that it is a nation, that there's a national fan base out there that responds. We get responses from all over, not just this country, but elsewhere in the world. And they're active. There's not a lot of passive voices in Raider Nation.
You can say that again, yeah.
I mean, it's a great world to be a part of. And as you said earlier, everyone is welcome. And I think in many ways that's the way sports should be, and that's the way franchises need to move. I think once again, the Raiders are out front of the rest of sports in terms of how sports can bring us all together. That is, everyone gets along, no matter your status. Outsiders are welcome, and when we're a part of Raider Nation, everything else goes away because we're cheering for the same thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Very
in
well.
In this case, it's the film, and I love that.
Yeah, I mean, you said it about as well as I could. Where it is, this fan base is an eclectic one. It is an active one. It is a very passionate one. But at the end of the day, regardless of race, creed, color, how much money you make, where you live, they are all dedicated to seeing this organization succeed. Well, Ken, we appreciate your time so immensely. We're all going to be very, very excited. The film comes out February 4th at 9:00 p.m., and you can bet that us and a lot of our friends will be tuned in. So thank you for hanging out with us. We appreciate you.
All right. Thanks so much, Raider Nation.